regulations in ways that are compliant with American values.
Mr. Chabra.
Senator, our view is that AI is too transformational a technology not to be governed by our democratic processing values. We think it's absolutely essential that the federal government in particular take action to ensure that at a minimum AI labs are being as transparent as possible about their models, about how we are trying to align them to ensure that they're safe.
And who they work with.
And who they work with, and that we're promoting democratic values.
Doctor.
I agree 100%. As I said in my testimony, I would define American values across a couple of different features. One is intellectual property protection and our strong legal system, which I think is absolutely critical. Secondly is lack of censorship. We know there's been a lot of very detailed research into the censorship that is built in to Chinese large language models, which in my view is not consistent with our values. And finally, I'd like to push back on a narrative I've been reading a lot recently about how we should emulate China in order to solve Senator Cornyn's problem, that China is somehow a more nimble regulator. It's easy to be a nimble regulator when the party controls not only the regulator, but also the judicial system to which the plaintiff would appeal to get relief from China's unlimited eminent domain. And so I think we can reform our regulatory system without fetishizing authoritarianism.
Thank you very much. Dictatorships are very efficient. Mr. Miller, you know, the challenge with data centers is that we have an electricity shortage. We already have an electricity shortage, and that's sort of at the bottom of this ramp. So I appreciate the bipartisan nature of this conversation. I don't want to get into an argument about energy policy, and I agree with Senator Cornyn. We need to move forward on permitting reform. But I'd just like to ask you if you agree with this basic point, which is the only stuff we can get on the grid quick enough to meet our immediate need in terms of data centers is, with some exceptions, but it's likely going to be solar energy. Gas is going to take a while. Gas turbines, we all know there's a backlog. Geothermal is, I think, got tremendous potential, but we're probably talking 2032 or later. Nuclear, likewise. Lots of really interesting technologies in the 2030s that could be different. But if you're talking about getting electrons on the grid right now, it's going to be solar. Am I getting that wrong, Mr. Miller?
Well, Senator, I would say I'm far from an expert in the specifics of the grid, but I hear a lot about both solar and gas powering data centers.
Anybody else on the energy piece?
Yes, I'll just say the fastest source of additional energy to the grid is to not subtract from the grid. And there's a lot of coal power plants that were slated to be shut down that are not going to be shut down because of the additional demand. But we've already squeezed all the juice out of that lump of coal. At that point, we then get to, you know, what is the speed of new construction and adding to the grid? And you're absolutely right. Whether you love renewables or hate renewables, hard-nosed, fiscally minded companies have identified that the fastest new capacity to add is solar plus storage. I would say solar plus storage being key. And gas turbines could be fast, but there is the backlog, as you mentioned. They're completely sold out for the next few years, and they're going to build a new factory to build more turbines, but that'll take even more years. And when you are taking out a $100 billion loan to build, you know, an unfathomably large data center, what you really care about is speed. You know, how fast are you going to be able to actually earn money on that investment? And that's where, you know, speed to power and solar come into play.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Senator Schatz. We're going to, if our panelists will stick around, we're going to go ahead and do another round of questions. And I know that maybe some of our senators will come back. So, Mr. Allen, you touched upon this already, but I want to dig into it a little bit more. The U.S. and a few key allies like the Netherlands and Japan together control the production of semiconductor manufacturing equipment, SMEs that we were talking about before. The Dutch company ASML is the sole producer of the extreme ultraviolet EUV lithography machines that are needed to make the most advanced chips. Currently, the U.S. and our allies apply some countrywide export controls on SMEs to communist China, but only on the most cutting-edge technologies like EUVs. This has succeeded in denying Beijing the capability of producing chips at the 5-nanometer level or below. However, ASML's less advanced but still highly capable deep ultraviolet DUV lithography machines are still being sold. Communist China is stockpiling these DUVs, which form the backbone of Beijing's efforts to produce cutting-edge as well as legacy chips. Mr. Chabra, what steps should the U.S. take in coordination with Japan and the Netherlands to prevent Communist China from continuing to acquire the equipment it needs to be fully independent, be a fully independent semiconductor manufacturer?
Yeah. Senator, I think we could take action to ensure that more tools are withheld countrywide from China.
Does that include the DUVs?
That does, Senator. We could take action to ensure that all advanced fabs are restricted in China. We could ensure that subsidiaries of various companies that have no constraints today are upheld. And then there's just simply the routine maintenance that's required for export controls. That means playing the cat and mouse game that's inevitable every year, and so you have to allow regular updates to happen as well. But I think more countrywide updates, also not being shy about using the foreign direct product rule as well is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Dr. Miller, you talked about this as well. Data centers are the key strategic infrastructure underlying the AI revolution. Every AI model, algorithm, and national security application depends on compute running in the data centers. The expanded construction of data centers in the United States and globally is key to promoting diffusion of the full American tech stack. At the same time, Chinese entities have used AWS and Microsoft Azure to access the advanced computing power needed for training AI models. This makes sense compared to our extensive controls on advanced AI chips. We have so far taken much less focused approach to remote cloud access for AI via the U.S. data centers, so a way that they can do it. Instead, cloud companies have implemented some safeguards like know your customer standards on their own. Some experts have argued the remote cloud access is the preferable alternative to selling to Communist China. It would theoretically provide us leverage to turn off the valve, so to speak, if we ever needed to. However, this leverage becomes more complicated concerning remote access to data centers overseas, particularly in countries with friendly relationships with Communist China. Mr. Allen, what are the risks of allowing Chinese entities to have remote access to advanced computing power via American data centers? How can you control the risk of chip diversion and end up, with unauthorized users? And do you buy the argument that allowing Chinese entities remote access gives leverage to cut them off when we may need to cut them off or so desired?
I think giving remote access to Chinese companies is directly against America's interests of winning the AI diffusion race, which is to say, if we want the world to be running on American AI models, then why are we giving China the computing power they need to train models that are almost or as good or better? So if we are thinking about all the market that is going to exist and grow over the next 5 years and 10 years, this is a critical window of opportunity to leverage our compute advantage, to build incredible businesses, to build customer relationships. And all that we are doing by renting this capacity to Chinese companies is building them a bridge to a future that they have stated absolutely will not include us.
Great. So, Mr. Chabra, your thoughts?
So I would just add to Mr. Allen's statement here, we believe the same thing about allowing Chinese companies to access the most advanced U.S. models. And the reason is that we see companies headquartered in China or other adversary countries using the models to build their own platforms, then taking those platforms global to win market share against U.S. companies. And in the end, as Greg said, they will drop American companies from that. And so we should not help them build that market share. And second, we don't want our AI to be supporting the development of AI applications that will end up supporting the PLA or the Chinese intelligence services.
Dr. Melvin, can you comment on that last part about if we allow Chinese companies access to remote data centers, will that get used in the Chinese military?
Well, the thing is that because we know that both Chinese models and U.S. models are currently being integrated into the Chinese military, and we know that those Chinese models have accessed U.S. cloud compute for remote, that means that by definition that remote access has in fact furthered the interest of Chinese military modernization. I would also point out that we have a significant problem on the cyber espionage side from about a decade ago when the Chinese intelligence services decided to move all the command and control infrastructure for their cyber espionage into U.S. cloud. to further complicate our ability to do attribution at scale. And so again, that's another element of how that remote access, which frankly is very easy to find on the Chinese internet and on Chinese WeChat, offers to join Microsoft Azure and other things to be able to get that backdoor access. All of those are fundamentally deleterious to U.S. national interest.
Great. Thank you very much. Chairman Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schaber, if I might, you've described the competition between China and the United States as having three parts, one of which is the race for frontier AI. Could you explain exactly what you mean and why it's so critical to be the first mover to achieve frontier AI? And can you explain recursive self-improvement and its relevance?
Thanks, Senator. So, Senator, I think the first element of this is just raw capability. We want more powerful models than China. We talked about the cyber case. We want better models for cyber defense, for cyber offense. We want better models to power scientific research. We have always relied on our innovation to power higher economic growth and to power more powerful military systems. So staying on the frontier is about raw capability. With respect to recursion, what that refers to is that frontier labs are increasingly using our AI to improve our AI systems. This is not speculative. We see that today. Anthropic today is now hiring engineers who are in some sense more managers than they would have been a few years ago because they are managers of AI agents. And so this is already a reality, and we expect to see even more of that. And what that could mean, and the timelines I want to say are not clear. It could take a bit longer, but in the next year or two, we could see efforts to really kind of close the loop where the AI can recursively self-improve itself with less and less human intervention. And what that could mean is a lead that begins with 6 months could really be extended rather rapidly. And so it's absolutely essential that we stay at the frontier for that reason.
Mr. Allen.
Senator, if I may, I'm sure you're all familiar with Moore's Law, the documented phenomenon whereby computer chips become roughly twice as powerful per unit of cost input every 2 years. This is a documented phenomenon going back to the 1960s, and it has led to literally a trillion-fold improvement in the power of computer chips per the amount of money that you put into them. But that occurred over 5 decades. If you look at progress in AI right now, there are 4 simultaneous phenomena that all exhibit Moore's Law-like characteristics. That is, the amount of training data that is used to train these models is doubling every number of years. The amount of computing power at the largest computing facilities has gone from 1,000 chips to 1,000,000 chips, has a path to 10 million chips. The performance per chip is going up, and just the efficiency of the algorithms in utilizing computing resources. And so what that means is that progress in AI might not look like Moore's Law.